Calligraphy literally translates to the art of beautiful handwriting, and it's clear to see why. With its beautiful inscriptions, it has amazed people for centuries and continues to thrive today. But just how old is Chinese calligraphy? Well, let's find out. Starting in the Shang Dynasty, Chinese calligraphy could be found on oracle bones and on bronze vessels, most likely made by a sharp-pointed utensil. It was used for Shang kings to document important divination rituals and also became an early indication of special status because there were a limited number of people who could read and write. However, this calligraphy is considered to be the prerequisites for true calligraphy because it lacks the linear variation. Those qualities that you might recognize as Chinese calligraphy started to merge and become widespread during the Han Dynasty, when Chinese artisans created the basic materials still used today: brush, ink, paper, and inkstone. It was used for communication between leaders and their followers, to write down teachings and ideologies, and much more. Overall, calligraphy became the supreme writing form. Now, quickly going back to the calligraphy supplies, also known as the four treasures of the study, or Wen Fang Si Bao, and let's just quickly go over what they are. The brush is typically made of a bundle of animal hairs pushed into a tube of bamboo or wood. The hair could be black rabbit hair, white goat hair, yellow weasel hair, and the tube could also be made out of jade or porcelain. The hair lengths vary so that it creates a tip shape, and they also come in different widths for different size strokes. However, all the brushes have great flexibility to create that perfect and fluid and expressive line. The inkstone was usually made from a sooty residue, created by burning pine resin or oil underneath a hood. Once collected, it is mixed with glue and pressed into a mold to harden. When using the inkstone, it can be ground against another stone and mixed with water to make a liquid form of the ink. This ink can be adjusted to the artist's liking by controlling the ratio between ink and water. Finally, the paper is made from fibrous materials such as mulberry, hemp, and bamboo. These are inexpensive alternatives to silk, which is another great option, but work just fine. To get started with my calligraphy journey, I reached out to Yvonne, who is a friend seminary parent who does Chinese calligraphy and was at our Lunar New Year celebration. I reached out to her and I went to her home and I asked her to teach me this character, Young, which means the eternity of life. And so in the beginning, you could see she was teaching me how to hold the brush, and we were basically just working through all the strokes, and she was going in the order of writing the character. So you can see I was practicing on what she calls like a doodle pad, and you just use water and it fades away as it dries. And so I was going through all the motions, and she had these cool books, she had a ton of brushes, and you can see she's flipping through to teach me. So I was going over the motions, right, and the first thing I noticed is the brush flexibility. It can be kind of hard to control sometimes. You see some of the strokes that I were making were not as nice as I would have liked them to be, and it took a lot of coordination. But I kept going at it, and here I put this moment in because she drew a giant Young, which I thought was really cool. So it's zoomed in here for you. Enjoy. Look at this. She goes really, quite fast, honestly, for writing. And I'll just show you my writing in real time. Just that one character, super duper slow, because it's pretty difficult to control. And even that doesn't really look like it. I could have held the brush with a little bit more pressure until the end. You see I picked it up too early there. So it just goes to show how much coordination goes into Chinese calligraphy. But I had a really great time, and I think that this experience was really cool because I got to see the authenticity of Chinese calligraphy, and I got to try it out, and you can see my stroke is getting a little bit better, and then I started working on the Young character, and putting it all together is really like a little nerve-wracking when you're first doing it, but it's a super fun experience. You can see that I'm working on it over there, and I'm getting all the motions in, and I eventually produced some really nice ones right here, as you can see. So just for fun, I brought out my father's stamp that he has and he got from China, and it's basically his name engraved in that square shape. and she had some red ink, and it's kind of pasty, as you can see, and so she let me use it, and we had to press down super duper hard on the rice paper to really get all the ink out there, and it was super cool. The purpose of these red seals is basically like a signature, to indicate who did a piece of artwork or to put someone's name to a document. This one is her son's, and so that was really awesome. However, my learning was not over yet. I had to create a final product, and so when I got home, I kept writing and trying to create something that was nice, clean, and clearly written. Something I quickly picked up when working with the rice paper is how absorbent it was. It soaked in all my ink, and I didn't even think that my brush could reach those sizes, but because of the water and how much the paper absorbed it, I got really, really thick brush strokes. And so that was a bit of a learning curve for me, as I had to figure out now the right amount of water to ink, like that ratio I was talking about earlier, and then also how fast I should be writing on the paper so that it doesn't just all absorb and bleed through. Somewhere along the line, I decided to take out these red papers that I had gotten and decide to write on them. I was very hesitant to using them because, as you can see, my brushes are quite small, and in order to create a character that was proportionate to the size of this paper, I would need a much larger brush. But I decided to do it anyways, just because I remember Yvonne telling me that these papers were really kind of hard to write on because they didn't absorb as much ink. And so instantly when I was writing, I saw how little it bled. And honestly, that kind of satisfied me more. So I decided to try it. And the first result comes out pretty good. It's just very off-centered and pretty small compared to the rest of the paper. But overall, I think it was pretty good. So I decided to continue. Now for my second attempt, I decided to figure out how to center it. See here, I'm trying to use my hand to figure out where the center would be and then where the end would start. And I decided to also put more pressure when I was writing here and really overextend the brush to see how much width it could give me in order to make it look more proportionate to this paper, because I don't ever think I was going to meet the size of it, but I could at least make it look thicker. And I'm actually really happy with this attempt. You see that line was really nice, that little flick I just did there. And I think overall the character turned out really nice. I do wish that my ink had maybe been a little bit thicker, but I'm afraid of how that would have messed up my texture or if I would have been able to do that. So I really liked that stroke as well, and I think it turned out really pretty. Now, before writing my next character, I decided to write it on some rice paper so that I could have a few practice tests. And I really had some watery, very inky ink, and I think that created this really nice, rich color on the paper. And it really gave it that broad stroke that I would have loved to see on the red paper, but unfortunately it doesn't absorb like the rice paper does, so that couldn't happen. But I decided this was fun to try anyways because it was actually really, really satisfying to see this character look like print. This was my last hurrah. This was Fu, character that means luck and prosperity and is typically used on Lunar New Year. And I just want to go over some reflections that I have after doing Chinese calligraphy, especially as someone who does English calligraphy in their spare time. I think that the use of the brush and knowing how to work the brush is similar to how English calligraphy works. Like, knowing how to use it really changes how you write. So the flexibility for these brushes is definitely different from the brushes that I use for English calligraphy. I'd say for English calligraphy, I use brushes that are a little more stiff and kind of like a tip shape. They keep their shape more consistent while writing. but this one really bends, and so I definitely had to be more careful when I was writing and putting pressure down, because I could go from like no pressure to a ton of pressure with just a little bit of a push. And so that was definitely something that I noticed. And I think the ink is something I have to care about more, for sure. The mixing of water and ink, sometimes it got really irritating. Like I was adding a lot of ink, I was adding a lot of water, and sometimes it was too watery and the color didn't look good, and sometimes it was too inky and it felt like it was just bleeding ink everywhere. And that's nothing really that I think about when I do English calligraphy, so it's definitely something I had to consider because I also wanted the final product to be good. And the last thing is the paper. The type of paper can affect, like, depending on the materials, English calligraphy, but I feel like here the paper really did play a big factor, and half of the time I wasn't even worried about my character writing at this point. It was just, would this paper hold up my ink? Will it absorb a lot of my ink? Would it absorb none of my ink? Because then I had to coordinate how much I, took into my brush to use. So I would say that has been the most difficult part of this process. But overall, I really enjoyed it, and I think this was a really fun learning experience. Thank you. Bye!